So, what are some things to think about when you have a small living room and you want to arrange your furniture? Hi everyone, it's Carol from Discover Interior Design, and I'm so glad you're here. Well, in this video, I'm going to give you 3 essential measurements that you need so that you can arrange your furniture in your small living room, as well as what piece of furniture should be figured out and placed first. So let's get started. Throughout this video, I'll be referencing some other design topics and space planning topics that I've covered in other videos. So if you want to check those out just to get some more information and to dive deeper into those areas, I'll leave the link in this video's description to all those videos and to those playlists. So when you're planning out your living room, it's always nice to kind of have something in mind, where you may want to have your sofa or where you want to place the TV. But one thing that's super important with a small living room is to just double check that everything is going to fit where you like it to fit, and to be flexible if you need to make some adjustments. So there are 3 measurements that we need for any room, but specifically for a small living room so that we can really plan this out well. And they are figuring out the sizes of your furniture, figuring out the size of your living room, as well as figuring out how much space you need for pathways. So when you want to figure all this stuff out for your small living room, you can just do this in real time. You can stand in your living room and measure everything out, or you can also plan it out even more by drawing things out on a piece of paper or online. But either way, you just want to gather some sizes of different things in your room so that you can really plan out this space. So the first thing that I would do is figure out the sizes of those larger pieces of furniture that you want to have in your living room. And most likely that's going to be a sofa chaise, or maybe even a sectional. And that could also be maybe a shelf or even a desk or a smaller table. And that could also even include an area rug. And when you are measuring furniture, most of the time we use inches just because furniture is smaller. So when you're measuring your larger pieces of furniture, you would want to find out the width as well as the depth. And you may want to find out the height of something, especially if, say, you want to place your sofa in front of a window, but you don't want to block the view. Well, you'd want to measure the height of the sofa at the highest point, which is most likely the back part of your sofa. And when you have those measurements, I would round everything up to the nearest foot. So for instance, say you have a sofa that is 72 inches wide by 32 inches deep. Instead of using 32 inches, I would probably round it up to 36 inches, so to 3 feet. So we could just say a sofa is 6 feet wide by 3 feet deep. And that will just kind of help you when you are working with the dimensions in your room. And of course you can measure all of your pieces of furniture and everything in your room. But what I would do is at least start with those larger pieces. And then the next thing that you want to make sure you have are the dimensions of your room. You really need to find out how much space you have so that you can figure out if all your furniture or where all your furniture will fit in that room. And you want 2 main measurements. You want to get the width of your room as well as the length of your room. And you can think of the width as almost the side to side measurement and the length as almost the top to the bottom or a depth measurement. And most of the time when you're measuring a room, because it's a larger dimension, we use feet. And most likely when you're measuring your room, it's not going to be perfectly 10 feet wide by 15 feet deep. It's probably going to be 10 feet wide, 3 inches by 15 feet and 2 inches. There's always going to be a little bit of wiggle room in there. But what's important to think about is really trying to figure out how much space you have to work with, to figure out where those larger pieces of furniture will fit. And while you're taking measurements of your space, take measurements of the overall width and length of a room, but also measure those longer walls or those longer areas of a wall. So say you have the overall width of your room is 13 feet wide, but within that wall, maybe there's only 10 feet of space where you can place things. So just kind of take note of that information. And then the other thing to notice in your room is where you're going to set aside space and how much space you need to set aside for pathways. So that just means how to get in and out of the room, and so that you can move around the room easily. And so that's really deciding what side of the room and what area of the room that pathway makes sense. So figuring out the location of at least a main pathway ahead of time will then help you see how much leftover space you have to place furniture and other items. And ideally, it's nice to have, say, 36 inches of free and clear space for someone to move in and out of the room easily, at least to get over to the sofa or to get inside your main conversation area. So that's just a measurement that you can keep in mind. And then all the while you're taking these measurements and kind of getting a grasp of what you have to work with, most likely the answers to where you can place your furniture will kind of appear, just because you're doing all of that legwork of figuring everything out. And so when you are at that point, when you've taken all those measurements and you kind of have an idea of where you can set aside space for a main pathway in that room, the first piece of furniture that I would figure out where you want to place it is your sofa or your sofa chaise, or even if you have a sectional. And most likely in a small room, it makes a lot of sense to place a sofa or your sofa chaise or a sectional up against a wall, because that leaves some space in the rest of the room. You may have a room though where you do have some space to place your sofa out in the room. And if you do, I would think about placing that sofa where it would kind of go with the main direction of the room. So if you have a long and wide room, it would make sense to kind of place that sofa in that long and wide placement. And think about when you do place a sofa in the middle of the room, and especially in the middle of a small room, it does break up the space. So think about that and see if it might work better against a wall. But if it works out in the middle of the room, is there enough space so that your room doesn't feel even smaller because you are placing that sofa in the center of the room? And then the next thing that I would do after placing your sofa is placing other larger pieces in your room. And what you're kind of thinking about is kind of the bigger picture of that room and trying to create a balanced look, because your sofa has a lot of visual weight. It's actually this very large piece of furniture, and that takes up a lot of visual weight because it's a large piece of furniture. So is there some way where you can balance out your living room by placing other large pieces of furniture kind of in other areas of the room? So not placing all your large pieces of furniture on the same wall where your sofa is. Can you place your shelf, for instance, or a desk or a console table on the other wall or in other areas of that space, so that there's a sense of balance in that space? And then the third part that you can think about is where you can place all of those other smaller items that could be part of your conversation area or where your sofa is. Can you place your coffee table in front of your sofa, or can you place side tables next to your sofa, or even an accent chair or a floor lamp? And so when you have your conversation area kind of set up, then you can think about smaller items that can be placed in other areas of the room. And then you could just kind of step back and just kind of see how everything looks and feels. One thing with a small living room is you want to be really flexible, and maybe you need to make some adjustments. So for instance, if you can't fit both side tables next to your sofa, don't worry about it. Just use one of the side tables and maybe place the other side table somewhere else in the room. And then the other thing that you can think about is making some adjustments with how much space you leave for movement and pathways in the room. So say for instance, the only place that makes sense to put a shelf is on one wall where maybe that's the main pathway in the room. I wouldn't worry about it because a shelf normally is not very deep. It's usually maybe 11 inches deep or 12 inches deep for the standard size of a shelf. So if that kind of goes inside that main pathway of 36 inches, it's okay for a little while that maybe that area becomes a little bit smaller. Or maybe you'd like to move your coffee table up closer to the sofa to kind of leave more space on the other side of the coffee table. Well, then I would go ahead and do that. Ideally, it's nice to have around 18 inches in between your coffee table and your sofa. But if you move it up a little bit and there's still enough room for someone to get in and out of there easily, and it just works better for your space, then you need to go ahead and move that coffee table to make sure it works the best for you. So when you're planning the layout of your furniture in your small living room, just keep in mind that it's really important to know what you're working with, how large your living room is, and also how large your furniture is, so that you can create a space that's functional as well as beautiful. So let me know if you have any questions around this topic, and if you have any other ideas for us to think about when we're arranging our furniture in a small living room. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.